All right, we're on. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. If this is your first time here, let me welcome you. Everybody else, what's up? How are you today? I hope that your day has been going well so far, and I'm catching you in an okay moment. Because honestly, I'm feeling pretty good. I've had a very exciting couple of days. In fact, today was particularly wonderful, and I'd like to tell you about it. Before I do, though, there was these two other things that I had in mind to mention this week, and I want to mention them before I get into the other stuff. The first thing is, if you haven't listened to the ESPN podcast series on Bikram, you might go check that out. And Andrea from Yogaland was on the podcast last week. She had the woman who did that story for ESPN on her podcast as well. And I just want to say that I found it as mind-blowing as I found Wild Wild Country, the documentary on Osho, which we talked about on the podcast too, in the sense that hot yoga, this thing that has this global reach that so many people do, it is fundamentally originating from a con. And there's no other way to say it. I mean, I always thought that Bikram seemed like a shyster. I remember seeing this picture of him sitting on a Rolls Royce one time. I was like, that guy? But his reach, and he's still out there. People still do tradings with him. And the fact that there's people out there with yoga centers with his name on it still, I just think it's crazy. We had this whole month on the podcast talking about the Ashtanga community and how they're going to reckon the sexual assaults and abuse from the founder of that school. Well, I mean, the founder of hot yoga, this guy, he is clearly not somebody whose name you'd want to put up on your wall. And yet it's still out there happening. It's crazy. I would check it out if you haven't. I've reached out to a couple of people. I don't want to talk about the same stuff that's already been talked about, but I think there's other aspects that I'm curious about. And I've reached out to a couple of people, so we might get into it some. We'll see. The other thing I wanted to bring up, and it's a total terrible thing to bring up. I don't even know why I want to bring it up, but it's been on my mind, and I promised myself that I would say something about it because I feel like I need to. Maybe some of you remember not so long ago, I had Andrew Tanner on from the Yoga Alliance, and we had this very heated conversation about the survey. Remember the survey? Part of this new effort from the Yoga Alliance to revise the standards. So I'm kind of betting that someone from the Yoga Alliance is going to hear this, and maybe they're going to pass it around the office. Andrew, David, what happened to the survey, man? What happened to the data from the survey? It had to have already come in. Like, you can't still be waiting for the data. So the time that's happening now since the survey and the data was in and all this time where we don't hear anything about it, it seems to me that time is probably being filled with deciding how you want to present the data or the best way to present the data, which was the thing that we argued about, if you remember. I am putting out a public call that the Yoga Alliance release the data from the survey. Just put it out there, question by question, exactly as it is, the raw data. Don't present it to us in a way to try to serve some agenda. Just let us see the data as it is, raw, Let's see what people said. So, I don't know. I know it's a grouchy thing to bring up, but I just felt like I need to put that out there. Okay, so back to why I'm in a good mood and the awesome day I had. If you were listening last week, I announced that I have a new studio. And I managed to sign the lease on that and get the keys. And today was the first day that I taught in that space. And it was just a one-to-one teaching. I have this great friend, Sharon, and I'm giving her a shout out because I know she's going to listen to this. And she is actually downstairs right now because she's going to stay over tonight and drive home tomorrow. And Sharon has been doing like one-to-one teacher training with me, which is something I've been doing with a few people who wanted to train with me. And I've just been having them like come stay with me at my house for like a day or like a weekend. And we just study. And I've usually been doing it in my living room with them. But I got the new studio, and today was the first day that I did any teaching there. Sharon and I spent about 4 hours, and it was awesome. And it was awesome because it felt like unencumbered. I felt unencumbered. The yoga felt flowing very freely. And I'm excited about the possibilities for what I can do there. And I've got a number of very cool podcasts coming up. Today's is no exception. I'm talking with Cheryl Urbanczyk. I'm still not sure if I pronounced your name right, Cheryl. I'm sorry, but I'm so happy to be bringing this conversation to you today. It's the first in another unplanned series of podcasts, but this series is not about exposing any kind of scandals or reckoning with troubled leaders. It's about connecting to podcast listeners. So the next several podcasts are all people who sent me an email at some point or another, and something in that email like struck a chord in me, and I reached out to them, and we had a conversation. And I really, really love them. You know, as much as I appreciate and I find it exciting to have an opportunity to talk to like a big name yoga teacher, and everybody who's listening for a long time knows I have kind of a whole thing about wanting to hear about how things happened in the old days. So I like to talk to those well-known teachers because they can give those kind of stories that other people can't. And, you know, it's just cool to talk to like a well-known teacher who I don't know. It's sort of fun and exciting, but there's a pressure on it. And I think somewhere in the back of my mind, I have to admit, there's part of me that worries like, oh, if I don't get big name people on, then nobody will listen anymore. And you know what? That's such a bullshit idea, because often it's the not big name teachers that people resonate with like even more, I think. And I just loved connecting to people who've been listening for a long time and getting to learn so much. And today's episode, I learned a lot about religion and tolerance and the Islamic faith. So I'm really grateful to Cheryl for sharing some time with me, and I'm excited for you to hear it today. Before we do, let me mention that this episode of Yoga Talks is sponsored by yogalifestyle.com. During the 10 years that I owned a yoga center, this is where I got all of my yoga-related supplies. Mats, blocks, bolsters, books, posters, whatever you might need to help support your practice and study of yoga. Ray Greenberg, the owner of yogalifestyle.com, was on the podcast way back when, in January 2016. I encourage you to give it a listen. One of the things we talked about was why I chose to buy from yogalifestyle.com, which is because it's independently owned. You deal directly with Ray, who's a real yogi himself, and you get the kind of service that you're not going to get from Amazon. So if you're like me and you want to support businesses that are actually rooted in yoga more than the profit margins of corporations, then put your dollars where your beliefs are and go to yogalifestyle.com. This episode is also sponsored by our old friend KarmaSoft, your complete online yoga studio management solution. this is the software that I used when I had my center, and I can say unequivocally that it is far superior to MindBody Online. If you or anyone you know is a yoga, Pilates, or fitness center owner, manager, or teacher, and you have to do the work of scheduling and class payments and accounting, all of that can be made far easier and more efficient by using KarmaSoft. And I have been saying this since long before they became a sponsor. You can go back and listen to the episode from October 2017 featuring KarmaSoft's owner, Rudy Senecal, and you can hear all about the company and my experience with it. I highly recommend KarmaSoft. Check it out at karmasoftonline.com. All right, as I mentioned, today's episode is part of kind of a series. And one of the things that I think this series is about is people doing things that are maybe a little smaller scale and therefore maybe a little more sustainable and a little bit less in a position that they have to cater to some of the industry trends that work against what they're doing. And the way that people are dealing with the same mores and situations and difficulties that I've been expressing on the podcast, people have been finding their ways out there, as I'm sure many of you listening are, to do your work in a way that you can feel good about and find a way to make it happen. And I've been very inspired by a lot of you listening, and I'm always inspired by the communications. If you ever want to reach out to me, I'm very happy for you to do it, because the kind of conversations that have been coming out of those exchanges have been genuinely valuable to me. You know, me opening this studio and breaking away a little bit from this model of the yoga center that has to grow, that you have to get more students into it in order to survive. That isn't the only way to go. So, very cool, you guys. That's what the next few weeks are about. I hope you will tune in. Very quickly, before we get to today's talk, let me also mention my stuff. I am going to be at the Feathered Pipe Ranch in Helena, Montana, July 14th through 21st. I'm going to be at the Yogi Underground in Falls Church, Virginia, August 10th through 12th. I'm going to be at Wainwright House in Rye, New York, August 26th. You can find out about those gigs and more. You can listen to the archives of this podcast and read my blog and find my online yoga video offerings. Let me just mention about those online yoga video offerings. I think I mentioned this last week. I want to bring it up again because I was in the studio today and the lighting is really good there. And I had the woman come yesterday from the internet company, and that should be up there soon. We're going to have some good internet there. So all of you guys out there who've been subscribed to the live stream, I think the quality of that is going to bump up some. And I'm going to be introducing like a new teacher's edition where you get the live stream classes, but also I'm going to do like a weekly teacher's Q&A, and it'll be live and it'll be face-to-face video conferencing kind of situation where we can all actually talk to each other. You know, just today I was in the studio having this one-to-one and getting into really deep and valuable work with someone. And as much as the live stream classes have been really great and I've been connecting with a lot of you, this new thing I think is going to like take it to a whole other level. So I'm just excited about it. I wanted to mention it. Everything can be found at jbrownyoga.com. If you've been enjoying the podcast and you'd like to show us some support, maybe you would go to a blog or podcast page and make a direct donation, or go to Apple Podcasts and iTunes and write a review and give us some stars. We'd so appreciate it if you made those gestures. Okay, I will touch base with you on the other side, but for now, let's go ahead and get to this talk that I had with Cheryl Urbanczyk. So, hi Cheryl.
Hello.
How fun is this? We're talking.
Exactly. I'm really excited. I'm trying not to be a fangirl because, I'm old, but I'm excited to talk to you. I think it's really neat. So thank you.
Oh, it's really my pleasure. It's one of my favorite things to do is to just jump on with a podcast listener. Mm-hmm. And we honestly, your email just was very intriguing. I mean, I get a lot of different emails from people, and I think at one point I was talking about on the podcast how I was getting some criticism for not enough diversity or whatever,
Yeah.
And then I got your email, and it's you said, I'm a female Muslim hijab-wearing yogi.
Right.
And I just thought, I can only recall, I mean, you don't normally know someone's religious affiliations just by looking at them necessarily.
Exactly. Or their name. Mm-hmm.
That's right. That's right. And
Mm-hmm.
I've had one student in all the years I've teaching who wore a turban. He was a wonderful guy named Monik. I wonder if Monik listens to the podcast. That'd be great if Monik listened to the podcast. But we would have some wonderful conversations, but we kind of discussed that. And so the fact that you identified yourself like that in your email just felt like a kind of significant thing. And I was very curious about that, along with a bunch of other things that you mentioned. So
Mm-hmm.
I just appreciate you, giving me a little bit of your time today.
Oh, yeah, thank you. And I'm excited too, because I think, even how you kind of responded made me a little surprised, because I felt, there shouldn't be a surprise that someone who's Muslim is doing yoga in the same way you shouldn't be surprised that maybe someone who's Catholic is doing yoga or someone who's Jewish is doing yoga. There's people out there doing it. It's just maybe not on the surface or highly visible.
I imagined that it was such, but I know that sometimes, there are religious objections to yoga in different churches and religions. So I'm always interested. I know many people who have faith in all different religions, including Muslim faith, who are also practitioners. And so I think that they're not exclusive of one another. So that was one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you. Mm-hmm. So I guess, first of all, I'm just curious, where are you from? Where were you born?
I was born in Dunkirk, New York, which is southwest of Buffalo.
All right. And so was your family very religious?
Yes. My family was Catholic and still is. And we grew up going to church every Sunday and being more observant, for sure. Mm-hmm.
So if you come from a Catholic family, how did you end up becoming a Muslim?
I think like many people, you kind of go through periods of questioning, and I always felt very spiritual. I guess I never felt very comfortable with some of the things about Catholicism and Christianity, like the concept of the Trinity and this kind of thing. And so, in my early 20s, I read a lot about different religions and always felt a connection to God, but couldn't, I guess, find a place where I fit. And where I grew up was very rural, and there wasn't a lot of diversity there. So, life takes twists and turns, and I ended up in Northern Virginia outside of Washington, D.C., and I was teaching. And that was the first time, I guess, I ever met anyone of the Muslim faith. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. Maybe I'll read the Quran, because I have not read that holy book yet. And when I read it, it just seemed to make a lot of sense and answer a lot of questions that I had about faith and religion and my place in the world.
So how does that process go? Like, what's the conversion process to become Muslim? Forgive me my ignorance, but I know I was raised in like a conservative Jewish household, and it was a bar mitzvah, but I don't identify with the Judaic faith at all. And my father actually lives in Israel, and his wife converted to Judaism in Israel. And it has like this very rigorous process where you have to go up against the rabbinical council, and like, she's sort of like the most Jew I know in like the best of all possible ways because of that.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so I'm sort of curious about what was the process for you to become Muslim?
Well, basically, after I read the Quran, I thought about it for a while. And because I knew people who were Muslim, I kind of talked to them. And I mean, the technical process is pretty easy. You just kind of announce a testimony of faith, saying that, you know, you believe in God and Muhammad is the messenger and Islam is my religion. And then after that, it's kind of up to you to, you know, learn how to pray and do these different things and seek out guidance and so forth. Because Islam is kind of, you know, there's no central structure in the way that, you know, Catholicism has the Pope and the Vatican. And, you know, Jewish faith might have like a rabbinical council or something. There's no kind of hierarchical chain, really. So, you know, you just learn and find your way and grow in your faith and this kind of thing. And, you know, it's interesting that you mentioned about, I think you said your stepmom, is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. People who I find convert to a faith often have a different sense and relationship to that faith than people who grew up in it. It's because it's more like it's your conscious choice instead of just like being born into something. And, you know, I think that's where you get this concept even of like born again Christian and this kind of thing for people who might have grown up Christian, but didn't consciously choose it in the same way as you might choose, you know, something different for yourself, let's say. So when they grow up and decide to choose Christianity, even though it might have been their birth faith, you know, it's different than kind of taking things for granted or going through the steps of your faith as more of a cultural practice instead of, you know, from a religious angle, let's say.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that's true. I think even people who grow up with certain religions at some point, they still have to choose it in their adult life, you know, like, because you could leave it. At some point, you get a place in your life where if you want, you don't have to follow it anymore.
Oh, exactly.
So it becomes a personal choice if you choose to or not. But it is the difference, and that is what I've observed with my my father's wife. That she does have her relationship to the faith seemed to me a very lovely expression, as opposed to some others that I saw that I felt were really hypocritical, frankly.
But you know, that's a sad thing about like any religion. You know, there's the people who see it as a bunch of rules that's black and white, and the holier than thou approach, as opposed to all life is being lived in the gray area and how you can use your faith or guiding principles to help you navigate that.
That sounds very yogic to me.
Maybe that's why I found yoga.
Well, when did you embrace Muslim as your faith? Like, what year was that, if you don't mind me asking? How long ago was that for you?
Okay, I don't have a calculator handy. I am 47, and I was in my late 20s. I mean, it took a while. It wasn't like, okay, I decide to become Muslim, and then all of a sudden the next day, you know, that's it. I'm practicing and doing that. It was kind of slow and gradual, but that was about the time frame.
Interesting. And I'm asking that, and you'll forgive me if this is insensitive in any way, and you can totally call me out on it, but I'm asking that because that would be before 9/11, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I just, living in New York and observing what happened in the United States after 9/11, it just seemed to me like everybody's relationship to the Muslim faith changed for a lot of people. Not for everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, but it was like this thing. So the fact that you converted to Muslim and then that happened, I'm just kind of curious, did that event impact you, and did the fact that you convert make any difference?
Well, by then I had moved up to the Toronto area.
I see.
And
You moved to Canada, so you weren't in America.
No, no. And, actually at the time I was working in an Islamic school, and I think we closed for a day, as did other Islamic schools. But, Canada as a whole, or at least what I've seen in the Greater Toronto area, is able to kind of be a little calmer and filter things a little better. And, the relationship to diversity is different here. So I really appreciate that. At least for me, I didn't see any direct impact like after that day. But, I think anyone who looks different, because it's kind of funny. I feel like I have a split personality because I grew up white and I feel like I'm white. And when you hear me talk, I sound white. But if you see me on the street, I look like a visible minority. And so I think, all people who look visibly different have some story of how they've been treated unkindly, let's say.
Mm. And was your move to Canada, was the fact that it's like has that other relationship to diversity, was that a factor in your decision to move there?
Not really, no. I mean, I got a job up here and met my husband and this kind of thing. So it was,
life.
More exactly.
Life events just brought you there. I get you.
Yeah, but it's kind of funny because, I grew up out near Buffalo, like I said, and at that time, going back and forth to Toronto was like fun. And it was so easy crossing the border back and forth. And people would keep going back and forth all the time because it was just next door. Now it's a little different, but...
it's harder to cross the border now?
Well, I mean, going into the States, it's always really different. I mean, I think the people... the lines are always longer. They ask you more questions. It's just a hassle. They hassle you. But I mean, because I'm a U.S. citizen as well, it's easy for me, right?
Yeah.
But
like you said, you have visible signifiers, even though you're American, and
yeah,
I bet
I don't fit any profile. I'm not young. I haven't traveled to, let's say, certain countries.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's nothing to pick up on either,
And what did your parents think about you embracing and becoming a Muslim? How do they feel about that?
Well, by that time in my life, I think they were kind of used to me always doing something different.
Yeah.
So it might not have been that big of a surprise.
Yeah.
But, I think in some ways it's been hard for them because, you don't get your family all together on holidays or, so forth. But I have to give them so much credit because I've been really blessed in that, kind of no matter what I've done, they've been there for me. So, I mean, I think that speaks volumes to the kind of people that they are.
That's beautiful. That's lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because not all parents are like that, whether you change faith or not. So
no, and I guess
that support's important.
And I guess the reason I brought up 9/11 is that it did seem to me that the change I was sort of thinking of is that some people associate Islam with anti-Americanism or and in some people, there's prominent thinkers who make a case that it's built into the Quran, and so I'm curious, you clearly have a different view or different teaching from the Quran than that. And
you could make that argument about anything. Different figures all through time have taken whatever part of their religious text and used it to justify any aggression. I mean, Christian slave owners were very content that they were Christian slave owners.
Right.
And
yeah, I think
it gets you into murky water, but this whole concept of clash of civilizations and stuff,
yeah,
I think that's a purely governmental thing. Like if you go to Egypt or you go here or you go there, people just want to live their life and they all want basic freedoms. And part of the problem is, many of the governments there have been repressive and more dictatorial. So, just like anything in human nature, the more you push people, the more they want to go the opposite way. And, but that doesn't mean, any Muslim I've met wants to, take down the states and this and that and the other thing. It's not really like that. I think there's so much more hype and not taking the time to really understand and just wanting to oversimplify. And I feel a little put on the spot to explain the whole Muslim religion.
I don't mean for you to. You can stop now. Again, I'm just curious about that dynamic. And it seems to me like I said, I've met people of Muslim faith who they just don't, like you said, they don't really seem different than other people to me. But it's when I guess someone's religion is taught in a way that is sort of like exclusionary of other religions or other people's paths or...
Well, that's it. I mean, look how many, right-wing Christian ultra-conservative nationalists there are.
Exactly. I don't think they're any different.
And it's really the same thing. Like your average person is just a really nice, great average person and will make a wonderful neighbor.
Right.
And you can find these exceptions anywhere, from any faith.
And you know what? It's true of yoga, and maybe kind of a good way for us to transition some that direction is like any texts, any spiritual texts, they're just always seem to me open to these wide interpretations. Like you can use the text. I've got 5 different translations of the sutras on my shelf. Depending on which one I pick up, I'll get a different idea about yoga.
Yeah.
You've got, I don't know how many different, temples or places of worship where you've got people teaching out of the Quran and they're probably teaching different things out of that same book, Well,
yeah. And I mean, remembering as well, Islam isn't a monolith in the same way Christianity isn't, or Judaism isn't, or even yoga isn't. There's no kind of, I guess, right thing. You know what I mean? It's
or there's no one thing. It's like, there's no, you can't say it's just that, like in yoga, it's the same deal. They have a lot of people doing a lot of different things and all using the same word. Mm-hmm. And in religion, you have the same kind of thing. You have a lot of people identifying in religion, but not always even agreeing amongst themselves, among Christians or amongst Muslims.
No, exactly. And that's, I don't know, part of the test of life, if you will, how you can kind of get through that in a way where, you can still stand firm by what you believe, but yet still be participating positively in your community and accepting people for where they are and what they're doing and all this kind of stuff without being so judgmental.
Mm-hmm. And guess just there has to be room for the existence of those who don't believe in what you believe. That's all.
Yeah, exactly. And this is, why, lately some of the things happening in politics around is very concerning because it's just...
It sure is. I mean,
taking us further away from that concept, and it's really, it's just really sad.
It really is. And, it's not something I bring up a lot on it's not something I bring up a lot on the podcast, politics, because it's so quickly divisive. But I think a lot of folks like myself who are very more progressive minded, it's a very scary time, and it's sort of hoping that there'll be some kind of righting of the ship before too long. Because it certainly doesn't feel like it's going in good directions. So we've got to see if the institutions can hold,
Let's hope. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm going to want to leave that there. I don't know. It feels like touchy waters. So now I'm curious how you started to get into yoga. that's not something that's widely being done within the Muslim community, is it?
I wouldn't say so, no. But I mean,
like,
well,
how do
again, maybe
you...
because...
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. What were you going to say? Go ahead.
Well, again, because maybe I'm a little different. I wasn't raised in a different country. I wasn't Muslim like my whole life, let's say. So I, maybe tend to see things a little bit differently just from my own personal experience. But maybe 5 or 6 years ago, we lived in Calgary, which is a really beautiful place. And that year was very hard for me. I was away from my parents. I had a different job. I was someplace new. And, there were some family things going on and so forth. And my mental state was just terrible. And I was overly anxious. And I couldn't kind of like get a handle on my brain, so to speak. And so I tried to figure out, okay, what can I do that is calming and might be helpful with that? So I tried yoga, and I think I got some different videos at that time because it's hard to find places for women to do yoga, which we can talk about later. Mm-hmm. But there was something in one of those videos where the lady talked about, breathing, and you can kind of let your thoughts pass. That was just kind of like mind-blowingly exciting for me at that time, because I couldn't picture myself in a way that, wow, you could really do that. I guess I was just in such a state of anxiety and whatnot that, I just couldn't calm myself down. So I would do these little practices, and it just seemed to be really helpful. And then I kind of got more into it. And, there's different women's, like all women's gyms around. So I found one in Calgary, and they had a yoga studio. And from what I know now, I think I was taking more Iyengar type classes there. And it was really hard because, and some new movements, right, for my body. And even the mental work and the breathing work was really hard, trying to kind of manage the anxiety I was having. And I really liked those classes, but unfortunately I couldn't continue. And then May, June, we moved back out east, back to Toronto. And so then that's when I found Yoga Glow, and I just have been kind of practicing with Yoga Glow ever since. And that's kind of why you get frustrated when you talk about how you don't like them, because for some people it's really
one of
great.
the things I wanted to talk to you about. It's one of the things I want to talk to you about, because it's not like I want to acknowledge, like, that's one of the great another reason why I wanted to bring you on, because you mentioned that in your email that like Yoga Glow was this like lifeline for you, and you like learned so much. And I know that's the case. Like, I know that is the upside of Yoga Glow and online yoga video in general. Like, it makes it accessible in ways that it wasn't. What I don't like about Yoga Glow is sort of what came out in my recent podcast with Kino and McGregor, actually, about the Cody video app, that the kind of the business model behind it, I think ends up being exploitive of the teachers. So that's the reason that's the paradox. That's the hard thing of it, because it really helped you, and I wouldn't want to take that away from anybody. But anyway, so what do you want to say? So you found Yoga Glow, and then you were able to take classes, and and now let's talk a little bit about, like, it sounds to me like one of the requisites for you is that it had to be a women only class. And you said something about that in your email that I thought was really interesting, that the reason had to do with, like, if there's not men there, then you can dress in ways that and be comfortable in ways that you can't when men are there. Did I read that right? Yeah, exactly. So because I do wear hijab outside of the house, or headscarf and long shirt and long pants, to cover myself in the way I believe. That, let's say, doing hot yoga is pretty much
impossible, because like it's really hard to, first of all, I don't know why people like hot yoga, because I have tried it a couple times and it's just really hot.
Yeah.
But like then to do that with more clothes on obviously is really, it's just too much. So, and I think because there's so much hot yoga, it's really hard to find, let's say, classes that aren't in a hot room. And then classes, like let's say this studio I have been doing my teacher training from and where I've been going, I talked to the owner there and she's really wonderful and I kind of explain. So basically what happens is I'll just kind of wait and see. If no men show up, I'll stay for the class. And so that's been working fine because,
there's not always a lot of men in class.
There's hardly any men in yoga, which is so funny.
And are you wearing what you described, that garb in class, or do you dress differently when men are not there?
No, I'll wear, the typical stuff because men aren't there. Yeah, exactly.
I see. So it's not that you're opposed to like yoga gear or whatever. It's just that
no, not at all.
It's too revealing to be in a room with men given your beliefs.
Exactly. That's it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And the owner was sensitive to that and allowed you to like figure out a solution.
Oh yeah. I mean, she's really great. And I mean, I understand her point of view. She said, I can't, she's like, there's never any men, or not never any, but very rarely men come. But if one comes, I can't tell them they can't come because you're here. And I'm like, sure, I get it. I understand because that's her business as well. And, wonderful for her, the more clients she gets and all that. But,
and men need yoga, Cheryl.
They do. 100%. Everybody does. It's just finding the ways it can appeal. And this is kind of one of the frustrating things, because she did tell me at one point a while ago, she did try all women's classes, but maybe because they weren't, I don't know what happened, but they were not sustainable for her and her studio, which, I get it. Everyone has to run classes that are profitable from a business standpoint.
Of course.
Yeah.
And I mean, the same thing is true of even prenatal classes, which I always had at the center, but because they're hard to sustain, because it's like, people are only pregnant for 9 months at a time. Yeah. And so it's really cyclical. And so sometimes it's really hard to keep those classes going. So I can kind of understand from just like a pure business standpoint.
Exactly. Yeah. And, then there's the whole thing about accommodation. Like I understand, that she is really willing to, accommodate me and what I can do and offer that, which is great, instead of just being like, well, no, that's too bad if you can't just leave if a guy comes. And you know what I mean? It's really good.
I do. And can I ask you, you can say no,
okay.
About what that is, why in your beliefs is it not okay for a man to see you in yoga gear, but it is okay for a woman to see you in yoga gear? Well,
there's modesty issues. I mean, Islam is not necessarily rare in this regard. I mean, conservative Jewish women, I think, wear more clothes, don't they?
That's true. And actually, I've had a few come, but they have come requesting women's only classes as well. I know it's the same issue for them.
So it's pretty similar. So it is a modesty issue. And, has to do, for me, the whole concept of is presenting yourself not from a physical appearance standpoint, but from a person standpoint. It's kind of very body positive in its own way, to be quite honest. That
it's very interesting. It's a very interesting idea.
Yeah, it's like, hey, I'm Cheryl. I'm not like this height and this curvy or this buxom or whatever I might look like, or hairstyle this way or that way, or it's just I'm judged. Because you could, I have a teenage daughter, and I worked in schools and with many kids. And, the sad thing is, Islam gets a bad rap because many people think women are, quote unquote, forced to dress with headscarf and whatnot. And that's not necessarily the case, but I could make the counter argument where if girls growing up feel the only way they can be accepted is to show themselves wearing super tight skirts and super tight tank tops, that's saying something about our culture as well. Mm-hmm. That we are so commoditizing or taking the female form, to the point where that's how we're judging women. And that's.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.